My name's Emily Carter, and I'm 38 years old, a woman who's spent her life piecing together the past, quite literally. I'm an architect specializing in heritage preservation, the kind of person who gets a thrill from saving old buildings from the wrecking ball. I live in a quiet little town, about 50 minutes from the place that shaped me, Carterwood Manor. It's not just a house, it's a sprawling, creaky old estate with ivy climbing its stone walls, a wraparound porch that groans under your feet, and secrets tucked into every corner. That's where I grew up, alongside my younger sister Lily, who's 34 now and a hotshot lawyer with a life that looks perfect on paper. Carterwood was my playground as a kid. I'd spend hours exploring its dusty attic, tracing my fingers over the carved banisters, imagining the lives of the Carters who came before us. Lily, though, she was different. She'd roll her eyes at my weird obsession with the place, more interested in her dolls or, later, her law books. Our parents, Robert and Margaret, always had a soft spot for her. Lily was the golden child, smart, driven, the one they bragged about at every holiday party. Me? I was the dreamer, the one they'd pat on the head and say, "Oh, Emily, always fiddling with those old blueprints. When are you going to get a real job?" It stung, but I learned to swallow it. The thing is, I never stopped loving Carterwood. Even after I moved out to chase my career, it stayed with me. The smell of its oak floors, the way the light poured through those stained glass windows. I'd visit when I could, though the trips got fewer and farther between as the years went on. Life got busy, and the distance between me and my family grew, not just in miles, but in ways I couldn't quite name. Lily climbed the ranks at her firm, married a guy named David, who's some big-shot financial advisor, and became the daughter my parents always dreamed of. Meanwhile, I was out there, restoring crumbling churches and forgotten estates, pouring my heart into places nobody else seemed to care about. Last week, I got a text from Mom. "Dinner at Carterwood this Sunday, darling. We've got exciting news to share. Lily and David will be there too. Don't be late." It was casual, the kind of invite we'd get every few months for a family catch-up. I didn't think much of it. Just another night of small talk over Mom's pot roast, with Dad droning on about his latest golf game, and Lily subtly flexing her perfect life. I figured maybe she was pregnant or something, and they wanted to announce it in style. So I tossed a bottle of Merlot into my bag, threw on a sweater, and made the drive out to the manor. The road to Carterwood is winding, lined with ancient trees that cast long shadows as the sun dips low. It's a familiar route, one I could drive with my eyes closed, but that night something felt off. Maybe it was the chill in the air, or the way the manor loomed up ahead, its silhouette sharper than usual against the fading sky. I pulled into the gravel drive and noticed Lily's sleek BMW already parked out front, right in the prime spot by the entrance, of course. My beat-up old Subaru looked like it didn't belong next to it, which pretty much summed up how I'd always felt in this family. I grabbed the wine and headed for the door, my boots crunching on the gravel. The porch light was on, flickering a little, and I could hear voices drifting out from inside, laughter, the clink of glasses. But as I got closer, I caught a glimpse through the window of the study. Lily was there, leaning over the desk with Mom and Dad, their heads bent together over some papers. They didn't see me, but I saw them, and my stomach twisted. Whatever this exciting news was, it wasn't just a casual announcement. They were planning something, and I had a sinking feeling I wasn't going to like it. I stood there on the porch for a second, the cold seeping through my sweater, watching them through the window like some outsider crashing a private party. Lily's blonde hair caught the light as she pointed at something on those papers, her voice too low to make out. Dad nodded, all serious and approving, while Mom smiled that proud little smile she saved just for her. My fingers tightened around the wine bottle, and I pushed the door open before I could overthink it. The hinges creaked, same old sound I remembered from when I was a kid sneaking in late, and the chatter stopped dead. Amelie, there you are! Mom's voice cut through the silence as she hurried out of the study, smoothing her apron like she hadn't just been plotting something behind my back. Margaret Carter's a pro at looking unruffled. Silver hair swept up in a neat bun, pearls at her throat, the picture of a perfect hostess. She hugged me quick, her lavender perfume wrapping around me like it always had. We were starting to wonder if you'd gotten lost. Yeah, traffic, I lied, handing her the wine. Smells good in here. Roast again? Of course your favorite, she said, beaming, but her eyes flicked back toward the study. Come on in, everyone's waiting. I followed her through the foyer, past the grandfather clock that's been ticking away in that house for a century, and into the dining room. Carterwood's got this way of pulling you back in time. Dark wood paneling, oil paintings of stern-looking ancestors staring down at you. The table was set for 5, the good china out, candles flickering in those heavy silver holders Mom only used for special occasions. Dad was already at the head of the table, Robert Carter in his element. Broad shoulders, graying hair, still commanding the room at 67 like he did when he ran his hardware business. Lily sat next to him, her husband David on her other side, all polished and smug in his tailored jacket. She flashed me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Hey, sis, she said, her tone light but sharp around the edges. Nice of you to join us. Wouldn't miss it, I shot back, sliding into the chair across from her. David gave me a nod, polite but distant, like always. The guy's a walking calculator. Great with numbers, terrible with people. Dinner started off easy enough. Mom bustled around, serving up roast and mashed potatoes, chattering about the garden club and how the roses were doing this year. Dad grumbled about some guy at the golf course cheating on his scorecard. Lily and David traded little glances, all smug and coupley, while I picked at my food and tried to shake that uneasy feeling from earlier. I kept waiting for the big news, but they were dragging it out, letting me stew. It wasn't until dessert, Mom's lemon tart, another special occasion move, that Dad finally cleared his throat and leaned forward, folding his hands like he was about to close a deal. Emily, Lily, we've got something to tell you, he said, his voice dropping into that serious tone I knew too well. Your mother and I have been thinking a lot about the future lately, what happens to Carterwood when we're gone. I set my fork down, my pulse picking up. Here it was. Mom reached for Dad's hand, her smile widening. We've decided it's time to pass it down, she said, and we're transferring ownership to Lily. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I blinked, waiting for the rest. Some kind of explanation, but there wasn't one. Just Lily sitting there, smirking like she'd won the lottery, and David squeezing her hand under the table. My mouth went dry. Wait, what? I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. You're giving Carterwood to Lily? Just like that? Dad frowned, like I'd asked something ridiculous. It makes sense, Emily. Lily's settled, she's got David, they're planning a family. Carter would need someone who can take care of it, keep it in the family. And I can't. The question slipped out before I could stop it, sharp and raw. Lily laughed, a short, dismissive sound that made my blood boil. Come on, Em, she said, leaning back in her chair. What are you going to do with a place like this? You're always off in some dusty old town, fixing up random barns or whatever. You don't need Carterwood. You've got your little project. Little projects, I echoed, staring at her. I wanted to scream that I'd been the one patching up this house for years, fixing leaks, repainting trim, stuff they never even noticed because they were too busy fawning over her, but I bit it back. Not yet. Emily, don't take it personally, Mom said, her voice all soothing now, like she was talking to a kid throwing a tantrum. We just think Lily's in a better position. She's got stability, a future here. You're you. That you're you hung in the air, heavy and cutting, It's what they'd always thought. Emily, the oddball, the one who didn't fit the Carter mold. I looked around the table. Dad's stern nod, Mom's pitying smile, Lily's smug grin, and felt something snap inside me. They had no idea what I'd done for this place, how much of myself I'd poured into it, and they were handing it over like it was nothing. I forced a smile, tight and brittle. Right. Makes sense. Congrats, Lily. My voice sounded hollow even to me. She beamed, oblivious, while David started rattling off plans. Renovations, a home office, a nursery. I tuned him out, my mind racing. I needed air, space, anything to get away from this suffocating room. I've got an early start tomorrow, I said, pushing my chair back. Museum stuff, I should head out. Mom protested. Dad grunted something about me overreacting, but I was already halfway to the door, grabbing my coat. The last thing I heard as I stepped outside was Lily's voice, bright and careless. "Don't worry, Em. You can still visit any time." The night air hit me hard, cold and crisp, and I stood there on the porch, staring up at Carterwood's shadowed outline. They thought they could just give it away, my home, my history. Like I didn't matter. But as I climbed into my car and peeled out of the drive, a memory flickered to life. Something about a box Grandma Clara gave me years ago, something I'd tucked away and forgotten, and suddenly I had a feeling this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The drive back to my place was a blur, highway lights streaking past, the hum of the engine drowned out by the storm in my head. I couldn't shake the image of them sitting there, so smug and certain, handing Carterwood over to Lily like it was a prize she'd earned. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. I'd spent my whole life feeling like the spare tire in this family, useful when they needed something fixed, forgotten the rest of the time. And now this. It wasn't just about the house. It was about every slight, every backhanded comment, every time they'd looked right through me. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I was shaking, not from the cold, but from something deeper. My apartment's nothing fancy, a one-bedroom with creaky floors and too many books stacked on every surface. It's home, though, my little corner of the world. I dropped my keys on the counter, kicked off my boots, and just stood there for a minute staring at nothing. That's when it hit me. A memory, sharp and sudden, like a splinter working its way to the surface. Grandma Clara, her silver hair pulled back tight, her eyes bright despite the lines etched around them. It was 15 years ago, right after I'd turned 23. She'd pulled me aside one afternoon at Carterwood, away from the chaos of a family barbecue, and pressed a small wooden box into my hands. "Keep this safe, Emily," she'd said, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. "It's important. You'll know when the time comes." I'd nodded, confused but too young to question her. She'd always been a little mysterious, Grandma Clara, sharp as a tack with a quiet strength that made you listen when she spoke. I'd stashed the box in my closet and forgotten about it, figuring it was just some old keepsake, but now, with Carterwood slipping through my fingers, her words echoed back like a lifeline. I practically ran to my bedroom, shoving aside a pile of sweaters to get to the closet. There it was, tucked behind a box of old sketchbooks. A small, carved thing, no bigger than a jewelry case, its edges worn smooth. My hands trembled as I pulled it out and sank onto the bed. The latch was stiff, rusted from years of neglect, but it gave with a little coaxing. Inside was a folded stack of papers, yellowed at the edges, and a single envelope with my name scrawled across it in Grandma's elegant handwriting. I started with the papers, my architect's brain kicking in as I scanned the legal jargon. It was a trust document dated 15 years back, when I was just a kid starting out. The Harrison Carter Trust, it read, established by Clara Carter, with Carterwood Manor as its sole asset, and there, in black and white, Emily Carter, named sole trustee upon reaching the age of 25, with full legal authority over the property. My breath caught. This couldn't be real. I flipped through the pages, heart pounding, and found the kicker. The trust had taken ownership of Carterwood from my parents years ago. They didn't even own it. Not legally. For 13 years, I'd been the one holding the reins, and I hadn't even known. The numbers came next. A ledger, meticulous and detailed, showing payments drawn from a trust account I'd never heard of. Property taxes, roof repairs, plumbing overhauls, hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years, all funneled through me somehow. I remembered getting emails from a lawyer named Henry Brooks back when I was 25, asking me to sign off on estate matters. I'd thought it was routine stuff, taxes or something boring, so I'd scribbled my name and moved on. Turns out I'd been keeping Carterwood alive all this time. $600,000 worth of my own quiet, invisible effort, while Mom and Dad threw parties and Lily drove her fancy car. I dropped the papers and tore open the envelope. Grandma's letter was short, but every word hit like a hammer. "My dearest Emily," it began. "If you're reading this, the time has come. Carterwood isn't just a house, it's our legacy, and I chose you to protect it. Your parents love it, but they don't see it the way you do. They nearly lost it once, years ago, chasing a bad investment deal. I couldn't let that happen again. You've got the heart for this place, the patience. The trust is yours to wield, but use it wisely. I believe in you." I sat there, the letter trembling in my hands, tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. Grandma had seen me, really seen me when no one else had. Not the flaky dreamer my family pegged me for, but someone strong enough to carry this weight. And she'd kept it a secret, locking it away until I'd need it most. I thought back to that near sale she mentioned, vague memories of Dad cursing about some failed venture when I was a teenager, Mom selling off jewelry to tide things over. They'd hidden it well, but not from Grandma. The room felt too small all of a sudden, the walls pressing in as the truth sank deeper. Carterwood was mine, legally, undeniably mine. My parents couldn't give it to Lily, no matter how much they wanted to. All those years I'd patched it up, paid for it, loved it. They'd been clueless, coasting on my work while I lived in a shoebox apartment and skipped vacations to make ends meet. Anger flared hot in my chest, but there was something else too. Power. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the overlooked sister or the weird daughter. I held the cards. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Henry Brooks. He was ancient now, probably pushing 80, but he'd been Grandma's lawyer for decades. It was late past 10, but I didn't care. The line rang twice before his gravelly voice picked up. "Emily Carter?" he said, sounding more amused than annoyed. "I figured I'd hear from you one of these days." "Henry," I said, my voice shaky but firm, "that trust, the Harrison Carter trust, it's real." A pause, then a low chuckle. "Real as the day Clara signed it. You're the trustee, kid, always have been. And my parents, they don't own Carterwood?" "Not a brick of it," he confirmed. "Clara tied it up tight. You're the one keeping it standing." I exhaled, the weight of it crashing over me. "I need to see you tomorrow. We've got a mess to sort out." "Thought you might say that," he replied. "Noon my office, bring the papers, and brace yourself, Emily. This is gonna stir the pot." I hung up, staring at the box on my lap. Stir the pot? Oh, it was going to do more than that. My family had no idea what was coming. Not the smug sister, not the proud parents. They'd tried to cut me out, but Grandma had made sure they couldn't. Tomorrow I'd start figuring out how to play this hand, whether I'd blow it all wide open or let them crash into the truth on their own. I wasn't sure yet, but one thing was clear. Carterwood wasn't Lily's. It was mine, and I wasn't letting it go without a fight. I barely slept that night. The box sat on my nightstand. Grandma Clara's papers spilling out like a confession I couldn't unhear. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lily's smirk, Dad's stern nod, Mom's pitying little smile, like they'd already written me out of the story, and then Grandma's voice, soft but steady, cutting through the noise. "You'll know when the time comes." Well, it had come, all right, and I was wide awake at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do about it. Part of me wanted to storm back to Carterwood right then, slam those papers on the table, and watch their faces collapse. I could picture it, Lily's smug grin melting into shock, Dad's jaw tightening as he realized he'd been outplayed, Mom fumbling for words. It'd feel good, no question. After years of being the afterthought, the quiet one who fixed things while they took the credit, I'd finally get to shove the truth in their faces. Carterwood wasn't theirs to give away. He'd been the one holding it together. $600,000 of my own sweat and sacrifice. And they didn't even know. But then what? I'd win the battle, sure, but the war? That'd be uglier. Dad's temper would flare. He'd probably call me ungrateful, accuse me of scheming behind their backs. Lily'd twist it into some sob story about how I was jealous, stealing her big moment, and Mom? She'd cry, play the wounded mother card like I'd betrayed her by keeping Grandma's secret. They'd never forgive me, and Carter would turn into a battlefield instead of the home I'd fought so hard to save. I rolled over, burying my face in the pillow. Was that what Grandma wanted? For me to torch the family to keep her legacy alive? By morning, I was a mess. Coffee in one hand, trust documents in the other, pacing my tiny kitchen like a caged animal. I kept coming back to her letter. Use it wisely, she'd written. Not use it to win or use it to punish, just wisely. That stuck with me. Grandma hadn't trusted Mom and Dad with Carterwood. She'd said it herself. They'd nearly lost it once. But she hadn't cut them out completely either. She'd picked me, the one who loved the place for what it was, not what it could buy. Maybe this wasn't about revenge. Maybe it was about taking control, making them see me for once, and still finding a way to keep Carterwood standing. I needed answers, legal ones. Henry Brooks was my next stop. I threw on a blazer over my jeans, grabbed the box, and headed out. His office was an hour away, tucked in a brick building downtown that looked older than he was. Henry's one of those guys who seems ancient but sharp, white hair, wrinkled hands, but eyes that miss nothing. He greeted me at the door with a crooked smile, ushering me into a room stuffed with law books and faded photos. "So," he said, settling behind his desk with a groan, "you've opened Pandora's box." "Huh. Something like that," I replied, sliding the trust papers across to him. "I need to know what this means, really means. Can they actually give Carterwood to Lily? And what happens if I tell them the truth?" Henry leaned back, flipping through the documents like he'd written them himself, which, knowing him, he probably had. "Legally? No chance," he said, tapping a page. "Clara locked this up tight. The trust owns Carterwood, and you're the trustee. Your parents can sign whatever they want, but it's not theirs to transfer. End of story." So they'd just hit a wall? When they'd try? Exactly. Their lawyer, some hotshot from Lily's firm, I'd bet, would run a title search, find the trust, and the whole thing falls apart. They'd come running to me or you, demanding answers. He smirked. "Which is why you're here first, I assume." I nodded, chewing my lip. "I don't want it to get that far. I want to control this, tell them myself on my terms, but I don't know how to do it without—" I trailed off, not sure how to finish. "Without blowing everything sky high?" Henry supplied, raising an eyebrow. "Tricky spot, kid. You've got all the power here. Clara made sure of that, but power's only as good as what you do with it." He pulled out a file from his drawer, old and dusty, and slid it over. "Take a look at this. Clara's notes from when we set this up. She didn't just pick you because you loved Carterwood. She saw your folks heading for trouble. bad investments, living beyond their means. That deal they nearly tanked would have sold the manor to a developer if she hadn't stepped in. She wanted you to have the reins because you'd keep it safe, not flaunt it. I skimmed the notes, Grandma's handwriting, firm and precise, detailing every move. It hit me hard. She'd been watching out for me even then, betting on me when no one else did. I swallowed, blinking back the sting in my eyes. She left me a letter, too, I said, pulling it from the box. Said I'd know when to use it. Henry read it slow, his expression softening. Clara always had a way with words. She's telling you to trust yourself, Emily. You've been carrying this place for 13 years, paying the bills, keeping the lights on. That's not nothing. Question is, what do you want now? I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Yellowed plaster, cracked in places, kind of like my family. I want Carterwood to stay Carterwood, not some modernized trophy for Lily and David. I want them to see what I've done, what it's cost me. But I don't want to lose them completely. Does that even make sense? It does, Henry said, folding his hands. You've got options. You could walk in there, lay it all out, and let the chips fall. Or you could wait, let the transfer crash, and pick up the pieces. Either way, they're not getting around you. Clara built this trust like a fortress. Your call how to defend it. I thought about it, really thought. Waiting felt passive, like letting fate decide for me. Telling them myself, though, that was scarier, but it put me in the driver's seat. I could show them the truth, set some ground rules, and maybe, just maybe, salvage something from the wreckage. I want to do it, I said finally, my voice steadying. Face to face. But I need help, someone to back me up, make it real for them. Henry grinned, like he'd been waiting for that. I'll be there, and I'd suggest bringing an expert, someone who can talk preservation, show 'em why Carterwood matters. You're not just fighting for ownership, Emily. You're fighting for what it stands for. Dr. Olivia Hensley, I said without hesitating. She's a preservationist I worked with on a project a few years back. She knows Carterwood inside out. She'd get it. Good choice, Henry said, jotting it down. Set it up for this weekend. I'll get the legal stuff ready. Proof they can't argue with. You bring Olivia, and we'll make sure they listen. I left his office with a plan taking shape, a mix of nerves and fire churning in my gut. This wasn't just about proving a point anymore. It was about honoring Grandma, protecting Carterwood, and finally stepping out of the shadows they'd kept me in. I'd spent 13 years holding that house together in silence. Now it was time to speak, and they were going to hear every word. The week crawled by, every day a tightrope walk between nerves and resolve. I spent my mornings buried in work, sketching out restoration plans for a crumbling mill 2 towns over, trying to keep my mind off what was coming. But at night, it was all I could think about. I'd sit there with Grandma's letter, rereading her words until they burned into me. Use it wisely. By Saturday, I was ready, or as ready as I'd ever be. I'd called Dr. Olivia Hensley, and she'd agreed to come, no hesitation. Carterwood's a gem, she'd said over the phone, her voice crisp and no nonsense. I'll make sure they get that. Henry was on board too, promising to bring the legal muscle. This wasn't just a family dinner anymore. It was a reckoning. I picked the meeting spot, Carterwood itself. If I was going to do this, it had to be there, surrounded by the walls I'd fought for, the history I'd kept alive. I texted Mom Friday night. Family meeting tomorrow, 6 p.m. at Carterwood. Important. Henry Brooks and a colleague will be there too. She replied with a cheery, "Can't wait," and a string of heart emojis, oblivious as ever. Lily shot back a snarky, "What's this about, Em? Another one of your projects?" I didn't answer. They'd find out soon enough. Sunday afternoon, I drove out early, the trust papers and Grandma's letter tucked into a leather folder I'd borrowed from work. Olivia met me in the driveway, her silver bob glinting in the fading light, a thick binder under her arm, years of preservation expertise ready to back me up. Henry pulled in 10 minutes later, his old Jaguar rattling over the gravel. He gave me a nod, sharp and steady. "You've got this, kid," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. I hoped he was right. We walked in together, the front door creaking open to that familiar smell, polished wood and a hint of Mom's lavender. She greeted us in the foyer, apron on, all smiles. "Emily, you brought guests. How lovely. Oh, Henry, it's been ages." Her cheer faltered when she saw Olivia, like she sensed something off, but she recovered fast. "Dinner's almost ready. Everyone's in the living room." I led the way, my boots echoing on the hardwood. Dad was by the fireplace, a glass of scotch in hand, looking every bit the patriarch. Lily lounged on the sofa, legs crossed, David beside her scrolling his phone. They glanced up as we walked in, and I caught the flicker of confusion on Lily's face. "What's with the entourage, Em?" she asked, half laughing. "You planning a lecture or something?" "Something like that," I said, keeping my voice even. I set the folder on the coffee table, a big, heavy thing Grandma used to pile with photo albums, and took a breath. "Thanks for coming. This won't take long, but you need to hear it." Dad's brow furrowed. "What's this about, Emily? If it's another pitch to fix up the house, we've already settled things with Lily." "That's just it," I said, meeting his eyes. "You haven't settled anything, not legally." The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that presses down on you. I opened the folder, pulling out the trust papers, and slid them across the table. 15 years ago, Grandma Clara set up the Harrison Carter Trust. It owns Carterwood every brick, every beam. And I've been the trustee since I was 25. Lily snorted, leaning forward. "What? That's ridiculous. Mom, Dad, tell her she's lost it." But Mom wasn't smiling anymore. She sank onto the arm of the sofa, hands twisting in her apron. Dad grabbed the papers, his lawyer instincts kicking in as he scanned the first page. "Henry," he barked. "What's this nonsense?" "No nonsense, Robert," Henry said, stepping up beside me. "It's ironclad. Clara transferred Carterwood into the trust years ago. You and Margaret haven't owned it since. Emily's the one with the reins." "Bullshit," Lily snapped, jumping to her feet. "You're saying she's been, secretly running the place? That's insane." "Not running it," I said, my voice steady despite the heat rising in my chest. "Saving it. For 13 years I've paid the taxes, the repairs, everything. Over $600,000 straight from the trust account Grandma left me. You didn't know because she didn't want you to, but it's all there, every cent I've put into keeping this house standing while you planned your renovations." Dad's face went red, his scotch glass clinking hard against the table as he set it down. $600,000? Where'd you get that kind of money, Emily? You're an architect, not a millionaire." "I lived lean," I shot back. "No fancy cars, no big trips, just me pouring everything into Carterwood. You'd have lost it years ago without me. Grandma knew you couldn't handle it. Remember that deal you almost tanked?" "She stepped in because you didn't." Mom gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. "Emily, how could you keep this from us?" "How could you give it away without asking me?" I countered, sharper than I meant. "You didn't even think I'd care." Lily crossed her arms, glaring. "So what, you're the hero now? You can't just swoop in and take it from me because of some old papers." "I'm not taking anything," I said, pulling out Grandma's letter and holding it up. "It's been mine all along, but here's where you get a say. I don't want to kick you out, Lily. You and David can live in the West Wing, make it your home. But Carterwood stays Carterwood. No gutting it for some modern showpiece. We work together to preserve it, or what?" Dad cut in, his voice low and dangerous. Here it was the twist I'd found buried in the trust's final page, the one Henry had flagged for me with a raised eyebrow. I took a deep breath. "Or I sell it. There's a clause in here, Grandma's last resort. If the family won't cooperate, I can liquidate Carterwood and put every dollar into a preservation charity in her name. You'd get nothing, no house, no legacy, just a plaque somewhere saying Clara Carter did it better. The silence was deafening. Lily's mouth dropped open. David's phone slipped from his hand, and Dad looked like he'd been slapped. Mom's eyes welled up, her voice trembling. You'd sell it? After everything? I don't want to, I said, softer now, meeting her gaze. I love this place more than any of you know. That's why I've fought for it. But I won't let it turn into something Grandma wouldn't recognize. So you tell me, what's it gonna be? Olivia stepped forward, her binder thumping onto the table. If I may, she said, calm and firm. Carterwood's a rare piece of history. Original woodwork, 19th century design intact. The West Wing's already been updated once, so it's fair game for you, Lily. But the rest? It's worth protecting. Emily's not wrong to fight for that. Henry nodded. Legally, she's got every right. The trust holds. And that sale clause is real. Your move, folks. Dad stared at the papers, then at me, his jaw working like he was chewing on something bitter. Lily sank back onto the sofa, her fight draining out. You're serious, she muttered. You'd really do it. I'd rather not, I said, leaning forward, but I need you to see me, really see me. I've carried this place for years. It's not yours to take, Lily. It's ours to share. If you're willing. Mom reached for Dad's arm, her voice small. Robert, she's right. We didn't know. We should have known. The room hung there, tense and fragile, everyone waiting for someone else to break first. I'd laid it all out. The truth, the cost, the ultimatum. Now it was up to them. My heart pounded, but I felt steady, rooted, like Carterwood itself. Whatever they chose, I'd done what Grandma asked. I'd used it. Wisely, I hoped. And there was no going back. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy, like the air before a storm breaks. Dad's face was a mask, his hands clenched around those trust papers like he could will them to say something different. Lily sat frozen, her arms crossed tight, staring at me like I'd just pulled the rug out from under her perfect little world, which I guess I had. Mom's eyes darted between us, her fingers twisting that apron into knots. Henry and Olivia stood quiet, letting the weight of it settle. I'd said my piece, laid out the truth and the stakes. Now it was their turn. Dad broke first, his voice rough but controlled. You're bluffing, Emily. You wouldn't sell Carterwood. You love it too much. Maybe, I said, holding his gaze. But I love what it stands for more. Grandma didn't save it so you could hand it off without a thought. If I have to choose between losing it to your plans or letting it go for something bigger, I'll choose her way. Every time. Lily let out a sharp laugh, bitter and shaky. So that's it? You're the martyr now, holding us hostage with some old lady's crazy scheme? This is my home, too. Then act like it. I shot back, softer than I felt. You want to live here, fine, but it's not your playground. It's our history. I've been keeping it alive while you were busy planning nurseries and glass walls. Meet me halfway, or we're done. Mom's voice cut in, small and pleading. Enough, both of you. Emily, we didn't know. None of us did. Why didn't you tell us? I looked at her, the hurt in her eyes tugging at me. Would you have listened? Or would you have brushed it off like always? Oh, Emily's just being dramatic. Grandma kept it secret for a reason. She knew you'd never see me as the one to trust with this. Dad set the papers down, slow and deliberate. 600,000, he muttered, almost to himself. You did that? Alone? Yeah, I said simply. Every tax bill, every leaky roof. I didn't do it for applause. I did it because Carter Wood matters. He nodded, just once, but it was something, a crack in the wall he'd always kept up. Lily shifted, her defiance fading into something quieter. Okay, fine, she said, glancing at David, who gave a tiny shrug. What do you want, Em? You've got the power here. What's your deal? I took a breath, steadying myself. You and David get the West Wing. Live there, raise your kids, whatever, but the rest stays as is. Preserved, not remodeled. We set up a family fund to cover costs, and you pitch in. No more free rides. I stay trustee, and we all get a say, but I've got the final call on anything big. That's it. Olivia chimed in, her tone calm. It's a fair split. The West Wing's modern enough for your needs, Lily. The core of Carterwood's what's worth saving. Emily's spent years proving that. Henry nodded. Legally, she doesn't have to offer you a damn thing. Take it, or risk losing it all. Dad rubbed his temples, the fight draining out of him. All right, he said finally. We'll do it your way, Emily. But this fund, we're in on it too. No more secrets. Deal, I said, the word feeling lighter than I expected. Lily hesitated, then gave a curt nod. Fine, but don't expect me to thank you for this. I don't, I replied, and for once, I meant it. We hashed out details late into the night. Fund papers signed, promises made. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. As they filed out, Lily lingered by the door. I didn't think you had it in you, she said, almost soft. Guess I was wrong. Guess you were, I said, and she left without another word. I stayed behind, standing on Carterwood's porch as the stars peeked out overhead. The house loomed behind me, solid and silent, a piece of me I'd finally claimed. Mom's quiet, "we should have known," echoed in my head. Dad's grudging respect, Lily's reluctant truce. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, too many years of hurt for that, but it was a start. Grandma's trust had given me more than a house. It had given me a voice, and as I locked the door behind me, I wondered if we could build something new from the pieces together, maybe, or at least not so far apart.